I think that the true test of values is when you're in a crisis. And so you go back and look at the pandemic. And if we had not had the values we had, it would have been much harder to pick the path we were supposed to take, just because there were so many other things to weigh and measure. But if you knew that care for the employees was number one, which it is for us, all of the decision making became very easy. So it becomes a real beacon, especially in crisis, and it makes it really easy to make decisions.
Welcome to the Power of Respect podcast with Charlie Leichtweis, author of the book, The Power of Respect in Business. Charlie is one of America's foremost authorities on respect and leadership development. And now, here's Charlie.
Hello, I'm Charlie Leichtweis. Welcome to another episode of the Power of Respect podcast. Today we are talking about the connection between family governance and business governance and its impact on legacy and family business. My guest today is Meghan Juday. Meghan is chairman of the board of Ideal Industries, a governance advisor, family business advocate, and founder of the Lourdes Forum, a peer network for women who are board chairs. Her dedication to the global family business community is rooted in her experience as the fourth generation leader and director of Ideal Industries, now more than 100 years old. Prior to that, Meghan was the Ideal Family Council chair and a director on the Ideal Industries board of directors for 10 years. She has also chaired the nominating and governance committees during that time. Welcome, Meghan. It's great to be with you.
Thanks, Charlie. Thanks for having me.
So as I mentioned, we're trying to talk about the connection between the family governance and business governance, and there's a whole bunch of things involved in that and impact on family, business, and legacy. I think one of the words you use is strong stewardship. Mm-hmm. So maybe you could describe that for us, and if that helps explain this connection.
So I think, when you think about stewardship, you always kind of think about caring for others. So it's a little bit of sublimating the self, and and it doesn't mean you don't have fun along the way. It just means that you are making investments, both of time and resources to support those future generations, whether it's, you think of stewardship of the land, it could be, future generations of trees, or it can be families in terms of future generations of children.
Right. So that seems to tie into to me to the concept of legacy, which at least in some definitions are, making decisions today for the benefit of future generations. And so in terms of legacy, maybe you could talk about what that means to you and your family and how it's evolved over time.
Yeah. So, actually my understanding of legacy has evolved since I've gotten involved with the Ideal family. And as a shareholder, obviously I grew up with talking about Ideal, and my father was CEO for a long time and then became chairman. So it was just kind of part of our day-to-day life. But as I started working for the family on behalf of the company and started thinking about how do we get this company down to the next generation, I also started noticing this real strong sense of legacy in our family. We want to do the right things. We've taken care of the stock and the company so that we can support it for future generations. But I also was feeling kind of confused because with all that, with all that illiquid wealth that was being generated and passed on, there were also some other aspects of legacy that were getting passed on as well. And so my sense is that, when you look at the concept of legacy is super positive. Nobody ever says, a negative legacy, right? But when you are thinking about a family business, not only are you passing on all those wonderful values and wealth and stock and everything else that goes along with it, you're also passing on any negative disposition you have towards the company or the family. And that can be really devastating. And in fact, that's one of the things that I learned as being now fourth, fifth generations of ownership, is that some of the legacy in our family was communication or dysfunctional dynamics started in the second generation. So legacy has kind of two sides of the coin, and it can be very confusing to be part of, and it's an incredible asset, but also have mixed feelings about it or mixed experiences. And I think that's because this concept of legacy, you're only supposed to be grateful. You're only supposed to have this amazing experience with it. And yet it's fraught with a lot of emotions. It's fraught with a lot of dynamics. And if each generation is not careful about the legacy that they're creating and passing down for future generations, you can end up with a very destructive legacy passed on along with all the good stuff.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. That's a great piece of advice. And it seems to me there's several key elements that affect all of that in the direction. One of them, and you mentioned already, values, and family values has got to be one of the anchor points to being able to go forward and try to keep a focus on the positive side. Some of the family values that you guys have used in your process would be examples of that.
Yeah, so we have basically kind of two sets of values. One of the things that I like to think about, and not that we have, values for us and values for others, but that we really try to, as a family, allow the company to operate on its own distinct values from the values we have as a family. But the values of the company are actually well rooted in our founders, the way that he believed a company should be run. And so the founder was my great grandfather, J. Walter Becker. And he was a super kind of the era guy, and then the company was started in 1916s. Everything was handshake agreement. He didn't think a deal was worth doing unless it was good for both sides. He believed that products should be worth more than the price they were paid, and that quality not only of the products we make, but then also of the relationships, care for employees, care for the communities. This was kind of this values umbrella that he placed on the company. And now we're in, I think, maybe 107 years. It keeps changing. I can never keep track.
Right.
I think we're up to 107 years now. And I believe that if Jay Walter came back and looked at, around the company, he wouldn't recognize the products we make. He wouldn't recognize the facilities we're in. But if he were to spend time talking with the employees, he would recognize his business, because there's not a day that goes by that you're not talking about the values that he started the company with.
No, that's a very strong element of keeping sort of the glue that holds things together.
Yeah.
When I think about that too, I think about that informing decision making, which is really sort of my definition of governance in its broadest sense, is how do you make decisions? And maybe you can comment, and you already started talking about a little bit how they made decisions in Walter's day. How has that evolved, and what have been sort of the challenges in evolving decision-making processes within the family business?
Well, if you look at, I think that the true test of values is when you're in a crisis. And so you go back and look at the pandemic. And if we had not had the values we had, it would have been much harder to pick the path we were supposed to take, just because there were so many other things to weigh and measure. But if you knew that care for the employees was number one, which it is for us, all of the decision making became very easy. So it becomes a real beacon, especially in crisis, and it makes it really easy to make decisions. And you'll see also in our family, we have family values as well. And those family values have actually been a real true test also when we're making decisions. So our family values are inclusiveness, transparency, relationships, engagement, empowerment, and stewardship. And so with those values, and the thing that's interesting when you have family values, it's not, you don't just do one. Every decision has to fit all those values. So you can't say, oh, well, I'm I'm empowering people, but then, you have to do the test of, is this the right thing for the organization? Are we being transparent? Is this going to help us build relationships? And so it's like that constant litmus test that you can use in developing policies, making decisions, and even being presented with challenges that you can use it as a measure.
Mm-hmm. Well, given, that various family members have their own views of implementing values or their twist on it, shall we say, not a negative term, do you see conflicts arising between decision making that some of the family members want to make versus quote unquote what's right for the business? And how does that work?
Well, I do think that and so we have 50 family members, 30 shareholders. It's a complex system. We also have a global manufacturing business, which operates all over the world. And so when you're trying to overlay two complex systems, it can be very challenging. So as we're looking at the values that a family has, I would say overall, the family believes in stewarding and reinvesting back in the company for future generations. However, when in any group of 50 people, to your point, you're going to get a little nuance, you're going to get a take or a twist. And that's where, and that's where we actually use what we call the task force process to really dig into where we need to have dialogue. So if there's questions, and in fact, we're launching this this year, the question of how much risk should we be taking? How much should we be reinvesting back in the business? What should we redeploy back to the family, et cetera, et cetera. We basically, those voices that are unique are actually, I think, very valuable because it's really hard in a family business, when 50 years in, that's how old I am, 50 years in, everybody knows pretty much what I'm going to say. Everyone knows pretty much what everybody else is going to say around the table too. Mm-hmm. And so if you do not have unique voices around the table, it's really hard to say, it's really hard to step back and ask the question, are we doing, does this still make sense? Or why are we doing this? That's probably one of the most valuable questions you could ask in a 100-year-old business is, why are we doing this? And not to be a jerk about it, but just to say why. And that having that unique perspective, it can be very challenging. However, it can help the entire family system grow. And so as we run through these task forces, we always try to bring in people who are super passionate about the topic, kind of for and against. And it's not always fun. However, it does allow us to get those why questions on the table, and we really get to learn, and we get to answer. Maybe we have a good reason why. Maybe, and the worst reason why you do anything is because this is how it's always been done, right? You should be validating that these are great places to be and great decisions we're making. So it's that kind of inclusive decision-making process that we use that's been really valuable for us, and allowed us to really move forward in a really different way in this generation than in previous generations.
Well, that's a great example. Giving everybody an equal voice, whenever possible, is certainly a key to that communication process. Undoubtedly, though, there are probably some disagreements, even within that structure. Without naming any names, perhaps you can give us a sense for the kinds of conflicts that may come up and how they've been resolved, keeping in mind, of course, what's best for the business, but also family harmony.
Right. That's still a lesson we're learning.
Fair enough.
And then and so I'll say that we've been using this task force process, as I mentioned, for about 15 years. And I'll say that it has reduced the kind of public conflict that we were experiencing, before we used it, because people would get upset. I've asked you this 6 times, and now I'm going to ask it in a public manner this pretty offensive. And, the family leaders would feel attacked, and then it would just kind of go round and round and round. And so now, even if somebody does bring up a pretty challenging question in a public environment, all we have to do is say, "Hey, that's a great question. Let's study it." And so the task force will kind of jump in and become mini experts on the topic. So, one of the questions we had a long time ago was, how come we don't get more money? Which is, a good question, right? I mean, everyone there's a lot of people who would want to know that answer.
Sure.
And so I think that so we did studies, we did research, we came up with the conclusions. And the task force, including the individuals who were very interested in wanting to know why we didn't get more money, was, we were kind of all resulted in, although we didn't change the policy, people really understood exactly why it was at that time. And it doesn't, and even if you did it 15 years ago, it doesn't mean you don't have the conversation again. And in fact, we will be having it again this year. The other thing that we've done as a fourth generation, so my generation, my cousins and siblings, one of the things that we did was we were recognizing that although we had this very good kind of governance, decision making and kind of conflict, it was really kind of mitigating a lot of the conflict. There was still a lot of kind of personal challenges. There were some pretty dysfunctional communication dynamics. And what we decided was that we really wanted to address this. We don't want to, we want to be responsible for the legacy we're leaving that future generation. And so my cousins and I and siblings basically engaged a licensed family business therapist.
Okay. Yep.
And it has been remarkable what we've learned, and changed the system dynamics somewhat, for the positive.
Mm-hmm.
And it's resulted in better communication dynamics, better boundaries, and better ways of the family addressing conflict. So one of the things that would happen is, someone would, it's really, email is now our public forum, which can be pretty terrible, and it's not fun. But someone will send something fairly offensive publicly, and in the past, there would be just kind of this, the majority of the happy group would kind of stay silent, and then it would be kind of the attacker and the attackee just kind of trying to resolve it in a public manner. And that kind of silent majority was part of our system dynamic, and what really left it was usually the family leaders who were getting kind of abused, and it really left them feeling, abandoned and hurt and not supported. And now, with the help of this work with the therapist, people have really, that kind of silent majority have really learned how to use their voices, and it's made a very big difference in just how like of that dynamic. And in fact, since we've started it, working with this therapist, the kind of email onslaughts have really stopped.
Well, that's great.
And I think it's just because there's just this dynamic of, it's not an effective way of getting my point across without also people getting their points across about my point. So it just becomes like this kind of circular thing. And it's so that, even just that has been a real major improvement, but there's been a lot of other benefits as well. And one of them has been that there has been a core group that's been involved working with this family business therapist. And what we have gotten a lot closer. We've been able to talk about, childhood and perspectives and family and what we want for the fifth generation. And it's allowed some of our fourth generations who maybe were a little bit distant to now have really bonded closely together. And it's been just so, it was one of the hardest things I did, because, by the way, this all was going on during the pandemic when everything else was really crappy too.
Wow.
But in retrospect, a lot of us stuck in and kept going, and we're still learning. There's a lot we can do, but it's really made a big difference today.
That's a great lesson for our audience, and it's also a great segue into the concept of generational engagement, what I want to talk to you about as well. You mentioned 50 folks. I also have a client who in G1 was, I think, 4 people. In G5, they're 45 people.
Yeah.
And that's a big difference in terms of number of people, all the communication lines you just talked about, all the feelings and understanding. So I kind of put that in a category called generational engagement. And it sounds like the therapist has led you guys through that as well. Can you tell me a little bit about how generational engagement has in your company has evolved from less people communicating to more, and then future generations being involved as early as possible in even understanding what is the business, what do we do, what are the products, what are the communities we affect, who are the associates we affect, that sort of thing.
Mm-hmm. So we started our 5th generation program when our oldest G5 was probably 5 years old. And so we've been doing this now for 20 years in, and there was a couple of things that we really felt needed to be done. One is, if the 4th generation is doing all this work to try to, get the governance right, keep the family going, get the business going, we better make sure that the 5th generation is pretty enthusiastic about receiving it. I've worked with a lot of families as well who, work their butts off, proverbially, trying to, get everything all perfect for that future generation. And I said, well, how long have you been working with the future generation on this? Oh, well, we're really scared about telling them about their wealth or the company. It's like, okay, this is not going to work for you unless you start making major transformations. So there's a couple of reasons why we started that 5th generation program. One is we really wanted to make sure that they knew about the company and knew each other. So we have a very distributed family. We're geographically dispersed. And, it would be very easy for these 5th generation folks to still not know each other 20 years later, unless we were being very deliberate.
Mm-hmm.
So but also we knew that even 20 years ago that we would not have more 4th generation family members working in the company. So I'm on the board, my husband's on the board, a couple other people, other family members in the boardroom, and our board readiness program. But nobody else is going home and talking to their kids every day about the company. Except my kids are kind of like exposed to it, whether they want to or not, because it's like a major topic of conversation. But a lot of other people, they have other jobs, they're doing other things, they live other places. And so they're not having that daily dose of ideal insights, culture, values, discussions that just would organically occur. And so we were worried that not that the parents wouldn't, but if they just weren't talking about ideal on a daily basis, that it would be very easy for this 5th generation really not to know anything about it. And so we felt that it would be important for the 5th generation to have exposure to the company, get to know one another. And so we started this 5th generation program. And it is basically kind of age appropriate engagement. And when the company pays for any 5th generation family member to fly in when an adult is coming in for a business meeting. So there's this kind of routine of, every quarter you're going to a family council meeting or a board meeting. The 5th generation, especially when they were little, would come along. And it would be just this kind of daily part, this kind of quarterly annual part of their routine. And so and then whoever the 5th generation showed up, we would do programming with them. And that programming, when it's little, is basically babysitters and, fun times. And when they get older, it's even just, 5 or 6 years old, you can basically do, work with outdoor educators, leadership skills, team building, interactive plant tours. And, there's just like 1,000 other things that you can do with them to just get them kind of oriented both to each other and to the company. And what's been nice is that most of these G5s have formed such strong bonds that even when during the pandemic, when they didn't see each other, for 2 years, they still were, they still were communicating and touching base and talking. And it's been a really great opportunity for them to still get connected. And now, they're college age and beyond. And we still have some really young ones as well, but it's really made it so that they're strongly connected, and they're starting to feel now, as the ones that are 20s and above are starting to feel some real responsibility. And in fact, we had a meet. We do a lot of meetings, and we actually were in person in November, and one of my nephews, second cousins. Can never keep it straight. What would be a nephew, but I don't think it is. He basically, he was in a meeting, he's kind of early 20s. This is not his life's work, but still, loves Ideal, loves the values, loves the family. And he said, during the meeting, I was starting to feel like, oh, this is boring. He was like starting to like power down, just to kind of zone out. And then he said, and then I realized one day this is going to be under our responsibility, and like sat up and, like re-engaged. Right. And that's like a really, that's exactly what you want. And you want someone in their 20s to do that, because, think about how much they have to learn, even at that very young age. They basically get 30 more years of us and our amazing expertise. That was in quotes for people who can't see it. And then it's on them. So it's, going to be it was very interesting, kind of an exciting thing that he shared, just because he's starting to get it. And it'd be pretty easy to blow off for another, till he's mid-30s, and then kind of wonder what the fuss is about.
Well, I think it's important. Some people forget the why we're doing some of this. And a lot of people say, well, so-and-so is not going to be in management, or they're not going to be on the board. But the broader picture is, many of them, especially when we talk about 50, they're not going to all be in the company, but they're going to be in an ownership position at some point in time. And therefore, I talk about ownership, but to me, it's the opposite side of the coin of responsibility.
Correct.
And so it's very important for people to realize it isn't just about what the next step is or the next position is. It's about the future in terms of governing the business and owning the business, and sharing that responsibility appropriately, and knowing how to, based on understanding the business. Well, it's interesting because you had a sort of a process that was different. Maybe it was similar because your dad was the CEO, but it was a process of being engaged in the business. Tell us about that.
So, as I said, I kind of grew up with, as did my siblings, with, Ideal as the other sibling at the table that we had to compete with for time and attention. And so I really did not consider myself, given the dynamics that I kind of talked about in the third generation, I did not really consider ever going into business, let alone Ideal. Ideal at that time, I think, just it wasn't a place where I felt like I would want to work. And I decided, so I kind of graduated from college, went off, kind of messed around after college, I had no clue what I was doing, and then happened to land a job at one of the big 5 consulting firms as a, project manager, kind of business analyst person. And I worked for really, really big clients in this big consulting firm, and it ended up being so rewarding. I loved that job. It was fantastic. And it was when I was there, I realized how much I actually had learned organically about business, just through these kind of ongoing conversations. And, attending not board meetings, but, business meetings and things like that. Like, I really did kind of understand more than a lot of my peers, not that I'm amazing or anything, but just because of that exposure. And so I did that for about 5 years, and and during that time, I, met my husband, got married, started having kids, and it was during that time that I realized that this employer, this consulting firm, didn't have any women working in the company between the ages of 30 and 45. And at the beginning, I didn't notice because they were bringing in women and men equally, 50-50. But then as you kind of rose through the ranks a lot, it's just a really difficult job because, as a typical consulting firm, you're traveling all the time. You never know where your next engagement's going to be. It's long hours. And it just didn't seem like the place where it would work to be, to be able to get home and see the kids every night. And so I took a year. My plan was to take a year off when I had my son. And I think I was, 3 weeks into my year off. And I was excited. Like, I was so excited to be a mom. It's kind of always one of the things I'd always wanted to do. And my dad calls me up and he's like, well, now that you don't have anything to do, how about you come work on this project? And really, I had a 3-week-old. It wasn't really that challenging. They sleep so much. And he called me when I had a 6-month-old. I would have said, like, call me in 3 years.
Right. Talk about nothing to do. I got lots to do.
I know. But it turned out great. So, what he brought in to say, just help us think about this. How do we get the fourth generation engaged? How do we start thinking about this transition? And it's kind of when I realized that kind of the passion and stewardship and values that I'd taken, that I'd kind of absorbed, plus like all this, consulting background experience I had, was a really, really great way of kind of putting it all together and finding a place to be able to contribute. And what was really great was that I also was able to work from home. And so I basically have been working remote for 20 years now. And it's resulted in some really great, some really great outcomes. And it's been a great career.
So as you joined the company eventually and rose through the ranks, did your relationship with other family members change?
Yes, and not for the better, may I say. In part, I think there was I think there's a couple of things that changed. One was that I had some people who really thought that, my father, believe it or not, as a family leader, so he was the only boy in his generation. Of the seven third generation folks, he was the only male. And, he had that kind of patriarchal leadership style, which really works in the first and second generation. You're just like, this is how it's going to be. And everyone's like, yes, yes, sir. Yes, ma'am. Right. So it kind of worked for the first half of his tenure. And then, the fourth generation came up and was like, you're not my dad. You're not the owner. Why should I listen to you? And so, and I don't think my dad had I think even he would admit this. I don't think I'm outing him, but that just like it was a really challenging environment, and he did not pivot his leadership style. Mm-hmm. So he became a fairly reviled figure. I think this is like a pretty common theme in family business, that leaders are just not very well liked, even if they are in fact nice people, like me, I'll say.
Right.
But yeah, it can be really, really, really difficult. And so I inherited a lot of the animosity that people felt towards my father actually kind of became mine. And that was hard and very confusing for me. It's like, don't you, like, these people should know me. I've been like serving the family. I really consider my work as service rather than, anything else. And I felt very confused and very kind of saddened by the assumptions that were being made around what I said, and that, I would say something and people would say, well, your dad said this for 10 years and, how dare you? It's like, I just opened my mouth. Right. Why are you applying 10 years of someone else's experience to me? Mm-hmm. And it's been really difficult. at times, and it like makes me sad sometimes too, that just like people would really attribute, some nefarious motive to really what I think is service and kindness. But it's also, I think, in part, was doing some reading the other day, and I was talking about kind of attributes people like to see in women leaders, and it's like kindness and strong leadership. It's like nurturing and tough love, and it's like all of these opposites that are really impossible. Like, this is the expectations people have of female leaders, that they want you to be both diametrically opposite leadership styles at the same time. It can be, and it can just be extremely, extremely challenging. And it's something that I think, obviously I'm hoping is going to resolve as more women attain leadership roles, that people realize you can be, a myriad of things and not, expect them to be diametrically opposed things at all times.
Right.
So it's been very confusing. I also think that in the past, although the company is majority owned by women, just by matter of birth and how many women have been born, and the second and third generations, it's women, in historically speaking, were not expected or maybe even discouraged to work at the company or take on active senior leadership roles. And that really people felt that, and this is all like so subliminal, but that there was really this expectation that the women would influence and the men would lead. And so they would kind of influence decisions, but they would not be the decision makers. And so to have the family, I think, also, by the way, when I became chairman, it was February of 2020. So I had like 3 good weeks before, the world shut down. And I think that, it was a very, very challenging time because, not only did the business demand a lot of attention, I had a board that was a different board than what I would have created for myself. They were all busy on their other boards and businesses, and then I had this kind of strange, it's an unexpected reaction to my becoming chairman. And although I obviously had a lot of family members super supportive, super excited, there was this kind of like, why her? Why not somebody else? And meanwhile, this transition had been planned for 10 years and announced and socialized and the whole deal. So I think it was really probably hopefully it's the most difficult time of my life is past. I don't want to think about what's coming up if it's worse. But it was really, it was surprising.
Yeah, I think, what you're saying candidly is more prevalent than people want to admit.
Yeah.
And if people, when they listen to this conversation, I think they might think that, and rightfully so, you might be a great person for them to reach out to if they're going through the same thing based on your experience.
Absolutely. And in fact, as you mentioned in the intro, I started a peer group for other female board chairs, mostly because I realized I didn't know anybody. And I was running into like so many roadblocks and so many kind of personal attacks and professional attacks that I just I was so confused. And I knew some of it was just because I was brand new at the job at a really terrible time. And I just I had a lot to learn. And then but some of it was some of these really weird dynamics that I was not anticipating. And the other part was that I never, and in fact, I was listening to this book the other day and someone else said this. I was like, oh, I'm glad I'm not the only one, that gender really never played a role in any of my professional career until I took the top job.
Right.
Then all of a sudden I became very aware that, oh, I'm the only woman in the boardroom. Oh, people don't want different things from me, from a leader, than who I am authentically. those kind of bifurcated, like
Right.
exhibitions of, softness and hardness. I don't know how to do that. I just only know how to be myself. And so I ended up deciding that I really wanted to find other women, mostly because I wanted to learn from their experiences, learn a lot about being board chair and like in an accelerated way. And so I started this group thinking I was going to end up with 2 or 3 women doing a quarterly board call, and now we have 60 women. It's international. We're adding more every week, and it's been such a joy, and it was really one of the bright spots of during the pandemic when we now all of this is virtual, so women can get together at a moment's notice. But to be able to reach out and say, hey, I'm experiencing this. What's your take? And for them to say, this is yours. You got to deal with this. This is like crazy town. Like, don't worry about it. And just a lot, like it have that kind of reality check was really valuable to me.
And the group you're talking about is the Lourdes Forum.
Lotus Forum, yeah.
LORDIS Forum. So
there's no R in it. LODIS.
Oh, I'm sorry. I misspelled it. Thank you.
That's right.
For that. Lotus Forum. Okay, so that's an option for people to look up as well, and I appreciate it.
Yeah.
And back to leadership style real quickly. People ask me all the time, how do I define, what do I call leadership? And to me, it's an equal emphasis on results and relationships. And it's not 50-50, it's 100% and 100%.
Yeah.
And being an analytical person myself, results and thinking about them, calculating, I could do that in my sleep. So what I have to work on to be better is to think about the relationship side. And I also find that in many cases, women are better at that than others. I know my wife is, for example. So that's the learning side of the leadership that can actually be the balance between the two, between the genders. And I think that really works. Well, I really appreciate your time. Any last words on advice you'd give someone else who is aspiring to leadership roles in business, particularly if they're women or a man?
So I have a couple of pieces of advice. One is do not do this by yourself. It is way too challenging. And I kind of learned, I feel like I learned this late. But as you're running into roadblocks, find friends, join groups, ask people every time you go to a conference, have your list of questions you want to ask around and, get some insights to, and, develop your group, whatever it is, if it doesn't exist, make it, because this job is, leading a family business, the weight of the legacy, the fact that you're dealing with so many different conflicting desires and needs and outcomes. It can be way too much to take on if you're isolated and alone. So you need to find those things that fill back up the bucket.
That's great advice. Absolutely. Well, thank you again for your time.
My pleasure. It was very nice speaking with you. Thank you so much.
So I want to thank Meghan Juday for being with us today, and I especially want to thank you for listening to this episode of The Power of Respect. If you like what you heard today, please consider sharing the podcast and visit our website at expertsinhow.com. A quick reminder, if you'd like to read my book, The Power of Respect in Business, is available on Amazon, and look for my new book coming out soon titled The Power of Legacy and Family Business. Thanks again for listening, and remember, respect builds trust. Trust builds relationships, and relationships are the key to leadership. Thank you.
This has been the Power of Respect podcast with Charlie Leichtweis, author of the book, The Power of Respect in Business. To listen to more episodes and to learn about Charlie's leadership development programs, visit his website, expertsinhow.com.